Good evening, everyone. So last week, we started learning an idea. We're in Perek Dal of Iggeres HaTeshuvah. We started talking about how the neshama of a yid, because ki chelek Hashem amay, so therefore the neshama of a yid actually mirrors the name of Hashem. So last week we spoke about the Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei, each of the letters of Hashem's name, and the significance of each letter of Hashem's name. I would like to, before we continue, I want to back up a little, maybe zoom out a little, and maybe give a little beer on that which we spoke about last week. As mentioned on different occasions, there's the idea of Mibsari Echza Alika. Mibsari Echza Alika, which means that this is a pasuk in Eiv, that we can look at ourselves and we can have some sort of comprehension in the divine, some sort of comprehension in Hashem. And this is because when Adam HaRishon was created, Hashem said, Nasa Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmusenu. I think I might have mentioned once already the story of the Rebbe Rashab. He had a younger brother. The Rebbe Rashab, his name was Baal Shem Tov Library. He had a younger brother, his name was Rabbi Naftali Silberberg. He's buried in Tzfas, the cemetery in Tzfas. And once they were sitting by a meal together, and this brother Menachem Mendel, he mentioned to the Rebbe Rashab that of late at that time, so we're talking either the late 18th century or the early 19th century, the Rebbe Rashab, he became Rebbe in 1882, and he was Rebbe through 1920. So the story doesn't say exactly in which year it happened, but again, either in the late 1800s or early 1900s. So at that time, the medical community had come up with a discovery. The discovery was that there's a certain artery in the brain, and there is vapor in this artery. And depending on the direction in which this vapor is flowing, that allows a person either to think deeply about something, to contemplate something, or to remember something. And that's why when a person wants to recall something, when you want to remember something, you pick up your head, because that causes the vapor to go in one direction. And if you want to think deeply, it's human nature, we put down our head. You don't pick up your head to think deeply. You don't put down your head when you want to remember. These are like natural knee-jerk reactions. So they identified the area in the brain that causes this. So the Rebbe Rashab, he told his brother to wait 1 second. He went into his room, and he came out with a manuscript of a maimer written by the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe was their great-grandfather, the son of the Baal Tanya. And he showed his brother that the Mittler Rebbe wrote exactly that in the maimer. He described this artery in the brain, which has the vapor in it. In Hebrew, the word is edim, with the aleph, edim, like the eid yalam al-aretz, like not a fluid, but like a gas inside it. And depending on the direction of flow, that helps a person either think deeply or to recall. So when Rabbi Menachem Mendel, he saw this, so his mind was blown, and he told his brother, the Rebbe, he told his older brother, so our great-grandfather, I didn't know that he was a big doctor. To which the Rebbe Rashab responded, he wasn't a doctor at all. But because we are created Bedugma, we are created similar to the way it is above. Again, we are B'Tselem Elikim Asas Adam. So therefore, some people, they know the way, they look, B'Sari Ech Zelaka. Some people, that's the direction. They look at themselves and they understand the way it is above. Great Tzaddikim, it's the other way around. They know the way it is above, in the higher supernal worlds, and therefore automatically they deduce that it must be the same way in the human being. So therefore, the Mittler Rebbe, because of his knowledge of the way it is above, he actually knew what was going on in the human mind 100 years before the doctors discovered it. So So there's this idea of, and this is a big help for us, that we're able to have some sort of comprehension in Lamaila. Although, as we spoke last week, it's like a map. It's not mamish the same thing, it's like a map. So instead of a river, you have a squiggly blue line. But it gives us at least some sort of, a glimpse, some sort of understanding, something. Epes vas. So let's talk a little about the Alter Rebbe. He talks first about the way it is above, and then he applies it to the way it is in the human being below, by a yid below. But let us go the other way around for a second over here. Human beings are complex beings, but we are right now going to talk about the conscious part of the human psyche, the conscious part of the human being. So, in the study of Hasidus Chabad, the one thing that emerges very clearly is that there are constant processes going on and causes and effects within our neshama, within our nefesh, and many times we see only the effect, but we also know that there are causes, and we're also aware of the causes. So when you see a person doing a certain act or saying something, so at face value, superficially, there was an act over there. There were some words spoken, but there are deeper stuff that are going on which led to this point, obviously. And Chassidus Chabad, in many places, starting in Tanya, maps out the human psyche, the human mental and emotional processes, which always lead to that which we see occurring, that which we see people doing. And as we shall see, the process is divided into 4 parts, corresponding to the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Whenever something happened, where does it begin? And very quickly, you have the Seichel, the Midos. Sorry, you have Chochma, Seichel, Midos, Machshava Diber Maisa. So if you work backwards, when you behave in a certain way, it's because you feel in a certain way. Every action starts off with a feeling, or either a feeling or a desire for a feeling, or the desire to avoid an unpleasant feeling, or you want a pleasant feeling. Everything that we do boils down to that. But where do our feelings come from? Our feelings come from our seichel. In other words, our perceptions, our understandings, our awarenesses. The Mashal that Rebbe brings down in Tanya, in the first part of Tanya, in the first prakim in Perik Gimel, that we see. Take a look at the feelings of a child and take a look at the feelings of an adult. They're radically different. Why are they so different? A child gets angry over small little things, and gets angry very often, and gets upset very often, and the emotions can be a roller coaster. And if you're talking about what a child likes candies, a child likes lollipops, a child likes silly little things. And when you grow older, so number one, your ava isn't the same. You don't enjoy and appreciate and like the same things, or at least not to the same extent. And the same thing is also your yira, that which you don't like, and your anger and your upsetness, and that which you dislike. All of these change. Why do these things change as we grow up? And the reason is not because our emotions change, but because our mind changes. We go to school, we become educated, and a lot of our education happens out of school also. We learn the education of life. And when our mind changes, and our knowledge and our wisdom and our perceptions change, so they automatically cause a change in emotion. So the emotions are always lifi erech the seichel. But where does the seichel come from? Where does the seichel start? The seichel begins in what is called chachma. Chachma means anything that I have in my mind originated in one of 2 places. Either I was exposed to it from the outside, or it came from someplace deep inside me. You might want to call my subconscious, the transcendent parts of me. When something is revealed to me, either again from the depths of my being or from outside, that original exposure that I have is called chachma. Before I process it, before I make heads and tails out of it, before I can say, I understand it well, I've built it, it's a structure, it makes sense to me, that first level of exposure is called chachma. And that requires bittul, obviously. That's why it's called koyach ma. I'm being mevatel myself to something outside of me. Chachma really is something outside of me or outside of the conscious me being exposed to me. And I need to be open to that, which is why Chachma is always synonymous with bittul. And as mentioned also on many occasions, Chachma is synonymous with Re'iyah, with seeing, because the idea of seeing is exposure. Something outside of you is being exposed to you. So when you see a behavior, you have to know, where did this behavior begin? It began with Chachma. It went through an entire process before it got there. When you see a person saying something, but where did it originate? It originated with something being exposed to you, because when we're born, there's nothing. We're empty, right? So something must have been exposed to us, again, either from the outside or from a very deep place inside of us. So the very first process within the conscious self is the exposure to something else, which is known as Chachma. That is stage one. Stage one. Now, what's unique about this first stage is that it doesn't really involve my ego. It actually involves the absence of my ego, as mentioned. You know, kli, as Chazal say, kli male, eni machzik, kli rekan machzik. In order to be able to receive something from outside your conscious self, you need to empty yourself and be open to it. So whereas everything that follows Chachma is about me and my work and the processes that's happening, which I am developing and doing, Chachma is actually me being open to something which is outside of me. Step one in the process. And that step is alluded to with the letter Yud. And the reason why it's the letter Yud is because it has no body to it yet. It is exposure to something outside of me. I didn't figure it out. I didn't process it yet. So therefore it's like a flash. It's like a dot. And then we take it and we develop it. And that is Bina. Bina is mental development. What makes Bina unique is that it's still within me, completely within me and about me. So stage two of the human process, of the psychological process, is Bina, which means me processing it within me, but at this point it's still completely about me. That is the hay, which, as we explained last week, the hay has width, the hay has length. The width represents me processing it and building up the idea, making sense out of it, and that it's not a tiny little flash, but also it brings it down, and it brings it down to what point? To the point that we get to the hay, the next hay. The Vav. And the Vav represents Midas. Now Midas, which is the emotions, that's obviously the next part of the process. We start with the exposure from the outside, which leads to, that's step one. Bina, mental processing, is the next part, and that leads, as we mentioned, to emotions, because the seichel is what creates the midas, as explained earlier on today. But more than that also, when we reach the stage of midas, suddenly we reach a stage where something else exists outside of me. Because a midah, by definition, an emotion is my reaction towards something else, towards something outside of me. A like or a dislike, a craving, a longing, or a desire to be distant. So midas is a real step down from bina, from seichel, because seichel is still pure me. And when we get to midas already, now I'm beginning to relate to others. But we still have to remember, at that point I'm relating to others, but it's still inside me. It's still my feeling, my love, my like, or my dislike, my fear, whatever it is. It's about someone else, but it's still part of me. So that's step three. Step four, and step three is alluded to in the letter Vav, and step four in the process is Machshava Dibur Maisa. That's the final result. Everything that happens, it starts with that idea which enters into you, that exposure to an idea, which then you develop in your mind, which then goes down to your heart. And Machshava Dibur Maisa, obviously it's not only about the other person, but it's actually already, the other person's already feeling it. You're speaking to another person. You're doing something for another person. So this is where a midah is about someone else, but it's still inside you, as opposed to Machshava Dibur Maisa. That's where the other person already sees the result. And that's why if you're looking around at other people, the only thing that you'll see is the Dibur and the Maisa. But when you see a Dibur and a Maisa, you know that there was a whole process that led to it, starting from Chachma, leading on to Bina, leading on to Midas, and ultimately to Midas and to Dibur and Maisa. Now this process, which is, you might want to call it the human process, so it's a reflection. We have that process because we are B'Salam Alekim, because we are Banim Atam Lashem Alekechem, because we are Chelek Hashem Amay, and by Hashem the exact same process takes place, although obviously at a much higher level. Now, to be clear, we do have to point out that Hashem himself transcends Chachma also. And as we have in Tanya brought on in different places, the idea of Kulam b'Chachma Asisa, the pasuk says, which means that the Hashem, Chachma and Asisa, Chachma and Maisa are the same thing. Because Hashem is above and beyond all processes. Hashem is essentially definitionless, and Hashem is what we call Actus Hapshuta, above and beyond everything. And as the Alter Rebbe alluded to when we learned last week in the Perek, this is alluded to in, on top of the Yud, there is the Koitze Shel Yud. There is that line that rises up above the Yud, and that corresponds to the Ratzon of Hashem, which is beyond everything. Beyond Atzilus, beyond all the Midas, beyond everything. And the truth is that because Banim Atam Hashem Alekechem, and because we are Mamish Chelek Hashem Amay, we also have that. Because beyond our Chachma Bina Das, beyond our Midas, beyond our Machshava Dibra Maisa, there's what we call the Etzem HaNeshama, there's the essence of the Neshama, which transcends them all. So corresponding to the level of Hashem, which is above and beyond the Midas, we have that within us also. But we are not talking about that over here, in this Perek. In this Perek, and as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about the conscious level of the human being, and similarly we're talking about Hashem as he already expresses himself and a desire, and he's entering creation in order to facilitate creation. And as mentioned last week, because higher than that there is no name for Hashem. Because once you go above and beyond, before creation occurs even conceptually in a lukus, in godliness, Hashem himself, there is no name. Then you have Atzmus Mahus, you only have the essence of Hashem. So in Hashem, when we look around, what do we see? We see a table, we see a chair, we see a sefer, a jacket, all these things. That results from where? From Hashem's Dibur. Okay, Hashem, by us we have Dibur and then we have Maisa. By Hashem it really stops with Dibur. Because, you ever heard in Rashi, Dibur Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chashiv Maisa. Hashem's Dibur is a Maisa. Vayemer Elokim Yihir, Hashem speaks and things happen. So everything here results from Hashem's Dibur. But when we see the whole world which results from Hashem's Dibur, we have to understand that there's a whole process which precedes it, starting with the Chachma of Hashem's Chachma, which is alluded to in the letter Yud. So the very first thing is, when Hashem's energy enters creation, the very first manifestation of it is in the Chachma, just like by us. When when the energy of the neshama enters our conscious self, its first stop is Chachma. Then Hashem's energy enters Bina, and he expresses himself through Bina, then the Midas, and then ultimately through Dibur. And these are the 4 letters of Hashem's name, which is how the energy comes down and ultimately ends up creating the worlds through the final Hey. The ultimate creation is through the final Hey. And within Hashem's name, we have the Yud, the Hey. Okay, that's part 1 of Hashem's name. And the Vav and the Hey, the second part of Hashem's name. And that distinction is important. And we know in davening, we say, L'shem Yichud, Kutshabrichu Shchinte, right? L'yachada, Shem Yudke Bevavke. There is the Yudke, and there's the Vavke, which for some reason we need a L'yachada. We need to bring them together. And what is the distinction between the Yudke and the Vavke? So based on what we've spoken about so far today, it's very clear. Yudke is Hashem's Chachma and Bina. We mentioned that is all Almin Disasimin, as we spoke about last week. Meaning, it's Hashem as he still is within himself. Yes, these are the processes that ultimately will lead to the creation of the world and everything. But at this point, just like when you have a thought in your mind, eventually it's going to lead to midas. Eventually that midah will lead you to do something, but at the point when it's still in your mind, there is no other person yet, it's still all you within you. The Yudke is Hashem, as he transcends creation. Yes, the process of creation has begun, but he's still in a state of transcendency. And the Vavke, as alluded to by the Vav, which is a line moving downward, the Vavke is Hashem as he already is relating to the worlds. So last week we did inside the Yudke Vavke as it is by Hashem, and now we are going to learn the way it is by the human being, which mirrors the way it is by Hashem. Only to mention that we also last week we concluded with a passage from Likutei Levi Yitzchak, from the Rebbe's father, and we said that Mir Hashem this week we'll use that to clarify a lot that's going on over here in the paper. Okay, so let's do inside. We are holding on page 188. Actually, on page Tzaddik Hey, opposite of page 188, the second line from the top. The kacha mamish al derech mashal, in the same way, by way of example, hamavdil havdalas le'in kates, although infinitely removed, benishmas ha'adam, everything that we spoke earlier about the way it is within Hashem, the yud, the yud and the hey, the vav and the hey, the same thing it is in the neshama of the person. So once again, we have over here terminology which we've pointed out before, which seems to be contradictory terminology. The Alter Rebbe says, the kacha mamish, this is mamish, the same thing. And then he says, hamavdil havdalos lein kates, but it's infinitely removed. And using the example of the map that we spoke last week, we can understand that. When you have a map, if it's a good map, it's an exact, would you say it's an exact depiction of the topography and of the land? Absolutely. But hamavdil havdalos lein kates, one is a bronze splotch and one is a mountain. But it's an exact replica, however, infinitely removed at the same time. She beginnes nefesh alikis, the neshama, which is a nefesh alikis, the mitaychi nafach, the nefesh alikis, which was blown into the body of a yid from the pnimius of Hashem, from the innermost part of Hashem. So yeshba, the neshama also has beginnes seichel hanelam. The first thing it has is chachma. Chachma, which is called seichel hanelam, it is hidden seichel. Why is it hidden seichel? Because it is an idea which has not yet been processed. Hamerumaz ba'is yud, and this is alluded to in the letter yud. So therefore, in our neshama, we also have the yud ke vav ke, and we have our chachma, which is alluded to in the letter yud. It is within the potential of the idea of chachma to be revealed. Lahavin in bina, when you understand, or lahaskil, when a person takes time to understand and to contemplate the truth of Hashem, the greatness of Hashem, etc. Everyone according to their ability, to the extent that the expanse of your mind allows it. And the more you and as you think deeply into this idea, which originated in the Chachma, but as you think about it in depth, you expand your mind to think about Hashem's greatness. Because here we're talking about the nefesh elokis, so we're applying the Chachma, the Bina, and the Midos, and the Malchus, everything, we're applying that to the nefesh elokis, so therefore it's thinking about the greatness of Hashem. Yeah, our nefesh Abahamis also has Chachma, Bina, and Midos, and Malchus. That's, as Alter Rebbe explains in Perek Aleph and Tanya, in the first part of Tanya, in Perek Vav of Tanya, that's because Zelu Umazeh Asa Likim. That Klipa has all the components that Kedusha has in order to be able to enable Bechir Chavshis. But ultimately here we're talking about the Nefesh Elikis. So when a person has Bina Azai Munubezes Bina Say Bo'is Hey, then the Bina is alluded to in the letter Hey. Sheyesh La Rechev, which has width, the Gam Oirach, and also length. Hameira Alam Shacham Umayla Matam. And this alludes to the drawing down of the idea, the concept, from where it is above within the soul. Lamata, to a lower place, to allow to give birth from one's bina, and that one's contemplation in the greatness of Hashem should give birth to ahava, v'yira, love and fear of Hashem, v'til de sehen, and all their offspring. All the other 5 midas are offspring of Ava and Yira. And from this, Nimshacha Avodah Amitis, from there comes the true Avodah Be'esek HaTorah VaMitzvahs, and being involved in studying Torah and doing mitzvahs. Bekoil V'dibur Aymaisa, with speech or with action. Hein Oisi is Vav Hevachulu, which speech is the Vav, and action is the Hey. V'gam, and moreover, Ha'isbeinunus L'havenu L'haskil. Another idea why Bina is the Hey is because when a person thinks into the greatness of Hashem, B'mitasiv Gdulasa Yizbarach, Hashem's truth and Hashem's greatness, Nimshacha Gamkein Mahatorah, this all comes from the Torah. Right? From where do we get the ideas which we contemplate? The greatness of Hashem comes from Torah. Where does Torah come from? The Iraisa Mechachma Nafkas. Torah comes from Hashem's Chachma. He bechinas Yud Shel Shem Havaya v'chulu. The Torah comes from the Yud, which is why when we think afterwards, Bina, to the greatness of Hashem, based on what we studied in Torah, that is the Hey, which follows the Yud. So with this we finish the Perek. And what we have over here is, before we start going a little deeper into this, just the basic idea that the Rebbe says over here, trying to bring out, is the connection between a Yid and Hashem, the Kichelak Hashem Amay. That Yidden down over here, as they are Neshama Beguf, as they are a nation amongst 70 nations of the world, Yidden over here, nevertheless, within them they have a Neshama which is a part of Hashem. So much so part of Hashem, that they carry the DNA of Hashem, and therefore they have the same constitution as Hashem. A Yid's Neshama has the same constitution, Kaviyachol, as Hashem. And why is that? Because it's like DNA. We're part of Hashem. You take the DNA of a little part, it has in it the DNA of the whole thing. So because Kichelak Hashem Amay, therefore just like Hashem expresses himself in the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, so our Neshama also expresses itself in those ways. No, such thoughts, such ideas can give us thoughts of elitism, of how great we are, Klal Yisrael, and how special we are. Because although Taka, we're one nation among 70 nations, but Kichelak Hashem Ameh, right? Yatziv Gvulei Samim L'Mispar B'nei Yisrael, Kichelak Hashem Ameh, they're Taka 70 nations. We are, but the emes is that because we have a neshama, because we have neshamas, it is our job to be the menorah. We have this week's parsha Baal Iggeres. So the menorah was made of 7 different candles. And what are Hashem's candles? Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam. So the menorah is made up of 7 different candles because amongst Klal Yisrael is divided generally into 7 different types of neshamas. There are some neshamas that are chesed, predominantly, and some neshamas that are gevura, and some neshamas that are tiferes, etc. And what was the purpose of the candles of the menorah? Was to provide light to the entire world. In fact, in the Beis HaMikdash, the windows were shaped in an interesting way. In the olden times, before they had electric lighting, commonly the way windows were created was that the windows on the outside, they were more wide on the inside, the window frame. On the outside they were smaller, and on the inside they expanded. And this way, with the light that entered the room, it would expand throughout the room. In the Beis HaMikdash, on the other hand, the windows were the opposite way around. On the inside, they were smaller, the window frames, and they expanded outside. And the reason why is because the light of the Beis HaMikdash, which is the light of the menorah. What was the light in the Beis HaMikdash? Was the light of the menorah. It was supposed to spread around to the entire world. And it's not as if the Yidden were able to be in the Beis HaMikdash and say to themselves, in the Beis HaMikdash and Eretz Yisrael, so we're amazing, Kichelak Hashem Amoy, And what do we care about the rest of the world? They don't have the neshamas like we do. So we're just going to sit, we're going to learn Torah, we're going to do mitzvahs, and who cares? We'll build walls around. We'll build walls around the Beis Mikdash. No, the menorah was meant to be light for the entire world. Eir shel Elam was meant to be light for the entire world. In fact, this idea is also alluded to in another area in this parsha. In this week's parsha, we have the Vayihi ben Soya Aaron Vayemer Moshe. Kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanacha mipanacha. The Aaron, when the Aaron would travel, the first time that the Aaron traveled is in this week's parsha. The Yidden were by Har Sinai for a year minus a few days, and then the command finally came to travel. And for 40 years they're traveling through the desert. And what is the purpose of traveling through the desert? So it's explained in Kabbalah, explained in Chassidus, is that the desert, which is a place which doesn't produce, a place which Asher lo yashav Adam Sham, it's a place which is not hospitable for Adam, including the Adam HaElyon, including Hashem. It's a place of klippos, a place of snakes and different klippos. And the Aaron, when the Aaron would go, so you'd have the kedusha of the Aaron. The job was to carry the Aaron all around, and thereby cause the klippos to disperse and disband and become bottle. And that's part of our job as Yidden, is to take the Torah and carry it around. Now, in times of the Beis Hamikdash, the light was so powerful. I think we've discussed this on a previous occasion. They didn't have to actually carry the Aaron around. The Kedusha and the Beis Hamikdash was so powerful, you opened up windows and the whole world was impacted by it. But that didn't last, and then we went to Galus, and really when a Yid goes off into Galus, it's another Vayihi ben Soya Aaron. It's really what it is. Every Yid is an Aaron, every single Yid contains within himself the light of the Eibishter, the light of the Torah, the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, Ki Chelek Hashem Amay, and we were sent into the world to make a difference in the world. So the fact that we have neshamas and that we're bana matam l'Hashem alekeichem is not meant to entitle us. To the contrary, it's meant to obligate us and to make us understand that we have the light and we have to light up the entire world. We have to light up the entire world with the light of Torah, the light of mitzvahs, and that includes the world, and that includes the goyim of the world, whom we are charged with teaching the Shemitz Bnei Noach, as the Rambam says, that Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded that the Yidden have to try to convince and compel all the nations of the world to follow the Shemitz Bnei Noach, to be just and to be civil, and not only that, but to do so because the Eibishter commanded so to Moshe in the Torah. In other words, we have to teach the goyim morality based on belief in the Eibishter, and that's our job. Why do we have the ability to do it? Because every single one of us is a menorah or a branch of the menorah, and it is our job to light up the world around us. So our special connection that we have with Hashem, as described in this Perek, on the one hand, it's taka very special, and it should make us feel very special, but at the same time also, as we say, as much as it's a zchus, it's also an achrayus, it's an obligation. And I'm saying this specifically also in response to what's going on around the world these days. That there's a lot of mishigas going on, a lot of craziness. And depending on who you ask, who's at fault in the craziness, this people and these people, whether it's systemic racism, some people will tie in, and other people will say that stam is people being chayis, rayis, and wild animals. But the emes is that everyone says that there are problems. The only disagreement about is who's the cause of the problems, or what's the cause of the problems, or where the problem is. But the world is in a place of, and there's strife. And we have to know that as Yidden, we can't, the easiest thing to do is to sit in Flatbush, to sit in Crown Heights or Williamsburg or Borough Park or Muncie, and to say, Mali, well, what does this have to do with me? Stam, it's the goyim, who cares? So I will go to my shul, my yeshiva, if it's open. And if not, I'll sit at home. I will learn my Torah. I will do my mitzvahs, and let the world destroy itself. What does it make a difference? But that's not the emes the Torah approach. The emes the Torah approach is knowing that taka, the atav v'chartanu mikol ha'amim, is for a purpose. The purpose is that we have to make the whole world into a place which is a dira le yisbarach tachtayna, a place which is a holy place, a place which is hospitable for Hashem, a place of kedusha. And we are the oir la'amim. We are the light for the nations. And for thousands of years, we've taught the nations, even though they've resisted at every single turn. But at the end of the day, we've taught them civility, we've taught them a belief in the Eibishter, we've taught them monotheism, we've taught them morals, we've taught them values, we've taught them about educating, All the simple things that today people take for granted, where does it come from? It comes from Klal Yisrael. Go back 1,000 years ago, there was no nation that educated all their children. Didn't exist. By Yidden, there was always V'shinatim Levanecha V'dibartamam. Every single year had to teach their child. I mean, we can have a whole class on this. Just talking about how many gifts the world received from Klal Yisrael, although they don't recognize it. You know, the world talks about the gifts of Einstein. He was a Yid, the theory of relativity. Jonas, what's his name? Salk, right? The vaccine. Yeah, those are all beautiful things, but the emes of values is the fact that people today aren't primitive animals like they once were, to the same extent they once were, but we didn't finish the job. And we have to finish the job. Which means that when we bump into it, when we go out in the world, we interact with the world, we have a message of Torah, a message of mitzvahs, the Sheva mitzvah, a message of light, and we have to realize that when things are going on in the world, that means it's a call to action for us, not only to insulate ourselves, but to elevate our level of oir, our level of light, and actualizing this idea of Kichelak Hashem Amma in the purpose, which is Taka, to bring the whole world to the place where it's supposed to be. Okay, Adkan Maimer HaMuskar. Now, if you recall, last week we read a little piece from Likutei Levi Yitzchak, from the Rebbe's father's Ha'aras and Zayar, and let's repeat it again. So, the words of the Rebbe's father are based on that which the Alter Rebbe writes, page 188, where the Alter Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe over here is explaining why the significance of the letter Vav. Let's do Ukamay. Mamish halfway down from the top of the page. First word in the line. Ukamay Adam, like a person Shareitza Lagalis Chachmasi Lacherim, who wants to reveal his Chachma to others. Aidei Diburi Al Derech Mashal, through his speech Al Derech Mashal. Nichlelas V'nermetzes Hamshacha Zuba Is Yizvave. So this Hamshacha, which again, the Hamshacha which is coming from the Seichel, but all the way down to Dibur, this is Vave. Why? Two reasons. Number one, because Vav is a line which extends vertically. So that shows that a Hamshacha from a place deep within to a place of relating to others. V'gam, and also Hamshacha zu hi ayidei midas chaste v'tuvei. This Hamshacha from deep within, which extends to people outside of me, comes to the midas chastoi v'tuvei, the midah of chesed and toiv, v'shar midas of hakidoshis, and the other midas of Hashem, hanechlalos b'derech klal b'mispar sheish. And how many midas are there? B'derech klal we talk about 6 midas. So the reason why you have the vav, the reason why the midas are alluded to in the letter vav, he gives 2 reasons. Number one, because the vav is is a vertical line, so that's extending from the place within me, which is about me, from my seichel, all the way. The midas carries it over to another person. And number 2, because of the 6 midas. However, when he talks about the midas, the Alter Rebbe does not enumerate the 6 midas. He says only midas chastei v'tuvei, the midah of Hashem's chesed and Hashem's goodness, His kindness and goodness, v'shar midas of akdoshis. And he doesn't enumerate the other midas. He just says the other midas. On this, the Rebbe's father comments. He says, chastei v'tuvei. He comments on the words chastei v'tuvei. So the Rebbe's father says, nokat beis l'shoinis. The Alter Rebbe over here, he uses 2 different terms. Chesed and toiv. Why chesed and toiv? Hu haschola v'hasoif da'shisha midas. That is the beginning and the end of the 6 midas. Shehascholas on chesed. The first of the 6 midas is chesed. V'soifan, what is this last of the 6 midas? Is Yisoid. Hanikra Toiv, and we know that Yisoid is called Toiv. Why is that? Kameshikotsav, as the Pasuk says, Imru Tzadik ki Toiv, say to the Tzadik that he is Toiv. And we know that Tzadik hu Yisoid. We know Tzadik is connected to Yisoid. Tzadik, Yisoid Olam. So therefore, Tzadik is Toiv, which is Yisoid. So therefore we have Midas Chastei V'tuvei is the first Midah, which is Chesed, and the last midah, which is Yisoid. That's what the Rebbe's father says. So the Rebbe speaks about this in a sikha, and the Rebbe asks, Two questions. Number one, why do you have to say midas chasdei v'tuvei? Why do you have to allude to Yesod at all? Why can't we just say midas chasdei v'shar midoisav hakdoshes, which is the words that the Rebbe used to continue chesed and the other midas? Why do you have to give the first and the last? What do we gain by the word v'tuvei? That's number one. Question number two is, if the Alter Rebbe is trying to say over here the midah of chesed and the midah of Yesod, then the Alter Rebbe should have said ayidei midois chasdei v'tuvei in plural. But midas chasdei v'tuvei, the implication over here is referring to a single midah. So how do you reconcile that? How does that jibe with what the Rebbe's father over here says? The chasdei v'tuvei is a reference to two different midas, chesed and Yesod. Excuse me. Those are the two questions the Rebbe asks. And as we mentioned last week, the Rebbe says that many times that when you dig deeper into what the Rebbe's father is saying, you uncover a whole new understanding of the Perek. So let's put aside for a moment the Likutei Levi Yitzchak, and let's go back to the Perek, and we'll discover a problem in the Perek, which those of you who with a keen eye might have noticed. And that is that although we're saying the entire time that the neshama of a Yid mirrors the way it is by Hashem, that the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the way it is by Hashem, mirrors the way it is, actually, the way it is by Yid, the Chachma, Bina, Midais, and the Dibra Maisa by a Yid mirrors the way it is by Hashem. But in fact, if you look closely at the way the Alter Rebbe describes the way it is by Hashem, and then the way he describes it by the human being, by the Yid, we see there's a significant difference. Chachma, by both of them, more or less the same. I mean, there are a lot of differences in words, and the Rebbe actually spends a lot of time explaining every difference in word. We're not going there right now. But Chachma, more or less, by Hashem, by us, the same explanation is given. That's the Yud. But let's move to the Hey. Let's go and see the way it is by Hashem, the Hey and the Vav, and let's compare it to the way it is to the human being. We're starting on page 188. We're going to start from the word where it says Va'achar, which is the last word in the line, 7 lines from the top of the page. Va'achar sheba lebechinas hispashtus v'gilui ha'asaga v'avana. After the energy of Hashem becomes mispashet, it expands, it's revealed in comprehension. La'almin tesimin, although it's still in the hidden worlds. Nichlalas v'nirmezes bo'is hey. So at that time the energy is included in and alluded to by the letter Hey. Sheyesh la bechinas hispashtus l'reichiv. The Hey has width. Hameiro meramaz al archavas habir vavana, which shows on the breadth of the comprehension. V'gam lo eirich, but it also has length. Hameiro al bechinas hamshacha v'ashpa milmayl lamata. That length shows how it comes downwards la'alman to the simen, to the hidden worlds. So the Hey is Bina, very clear. V'yachar kach, and afterwards, when the Hamshacha, when the energy of Hashem comes down into the revealed worlds, like a person who wants to reveal his chachma to others, by way of speech. Now, this is alluded to in the Vav and in the Hey. Why? Ki havav. What is the Vav? Not that, but continues and says, right, that the Vav refers to Hashem's midas. The Vav is the midas and the Hey is the dibur. So by Hashem, Hey is Bina, the Vav is the midas, and the last Hey is the dibur. One more time. By Hashem, the first Hey, the Yud is Chachma, obviously. The Hey is Bina. The Vav, the Alter Rebbe says very clearly, when a person already wants to be mashpia, which is already the midas, that is Vav, and then the last Hey is Dibur. Let us move now to the way the Alter Rebbe describes this same process by human beings, by a Yid. We're going to move to the next page, which is page Sadik Hey, and to the words where it says Ukefi Asher, which is 7 lines from the top. When a person thinks deeply and expansively, to think about Hashem's greatness, as I then, Mirumez as bina say, then the bina is alluded to by hey. Sheyesh lo rechav, the letter hey which has to it width, v'gam oirech, but also length. Hameira lamshacham l'mayl lamata. The length of the hay shows that the energy draws downwards. L'heilon mi binasei v'izbenyanusei b'gdulas Hashem, to give birth to through thinking and through the bina, ava v'yira v'til the same, giving birth to midas. First in the mind, then hidden in the heart, and then revealed in the heart. So what is the hay? The hay over here is bina and midas. And then comes Torah mitzvahs in speech or in action. Hein oisi is vav, that is vav. So vav, the vav is speech, and the hay is maisa. So this is different. It's absolutely different. By the Eibishter, the hay is bina, the vav is midas, and then the hay is dibur. And by us, the hay is bina and midas, the vav is dibur, and the hay is maisa. So I'm sure all of you are following along in this year. I'm sure that couldn't scream at me through your camera, but you're asking you what's going on over here. The Alter Rebbe is trying to bring out the parallels between the way it is by Hashem and the way it is by us. But if you look closely at the wording, there seems to be a significant difference between the way it is by Hashem and the way it is by us. One last time, just to say it. By Hashem, hey bina, vav midas, hey dibur. And by us, hey bina and midas, vav is dibur and hey is maisa. So the Rebbe explains that to understand this difference is to understand an essential difference between Hashem and us. Although we are a reflection of Hashem, there is a difference, and we'll see in a moment what that is. But the first thing we have to remember is that which we spoke about earlier in today's class, which is that the Yud K and the Vav K, both by Hashem and by us, represent radically different worlds. The Yud K represents Hashem as He is for Himself. The Vav K is already as He extends Himself outside of Himself. The same thing is by us. Our Yud K is the way as we are processing information and everything, but it's still totally within ourselves. We have yet to create any sort of relationship yet with anything, with any entity outside of us. And the Vav K is already as when we're extending outside of ourselves. Yud K is me as I am. Vav K is me as I'm extending myself outwards towards another. The same thing is the word by Hashem. Yeah.
What's the dibur and the human?
Dibur in the human is the Vav. And Maisa is the Hey. By both Hashem and by us, Seichel is an internal process. That's how, when Hashem reveals Himself in Bina, it's Him being Him before He extends outwards, and the same thing is by the human being, by the Neshamas Yisrael. How about Midas? When I have a feeling towards someone else, is that me extending outside of myself? No. I can argue. I am having a feeling. It is my feeling. It is still me. Where does me extending outside of myself begin? When I speak to you. And certainly when I do a Maisa, that's where my Vav K begins. As long as I'm in my Seichel or in my Midas, it's still me within myself. I have not yet extended outside of myself. So therefore, by the human being, the Yud K is Chachma, Bina, and Midas, because all of that is part of the Yud K. All of that is me within myself. The Vav K extending outside of myself is Dibur and Maisa. But there's a fundamental difference between us and by Hashem, which is my being, my essential entity does not preclude other people. Just like I was created, you were created, and we are essentially social creatures. Part of who I am is the fact that I relate to others. So the fact that I have a feeling towards someone else, that's not yet me leaving myself. That's just because part of my being, part of my makeup is that I also have reactions towards others. As long as I don't actually speak to the other or do an action, I have not yet left myself. Part of me is my midas, part of me are my feelings towards others. Hashem, on the other hand, essentially is Einoid Movade. There's nothing other than Hashem. If you want to talk about Hashem at its purest form, there's nothing other than Hashem. We can't say that about a human being, obviously. We can say that that's the truth about Hashem. So the concept of midas by Hashem, the very concept that he has a feeling towards someone else, is already Hashem stepping out of his essential being. His essential being is, there isn't anything else. His essential being is Eined Bavadai. The moment there's a midah by Hashem, that's not him. That's not him as he is for himself. That's already, there's something else outside of him. As opposed to a human being, I can have a midah and it's still, that's just me being me having a midah. In Chassidus it's brought down, the pasuk says, Olam Chesed Yibana. So there's the simple pshat on Olam Chesed Yibana is that the world was created through Midas HaChesed. But a deeper pshat in Olam Chesed Yibana is that in order for the world to be built, in order to have Olam, in order for there to be a world, Chesed Yibana, Hashem had to build Chesed. Because Chesed is not natural to Hashem. Because the whole idea of Amidah, stepping out of himself, Amidah means relating to someone else, doesn't exist in Hashem as he is because Einad Mavadeh. In a similar way you have on the first pasuk, Bereshis bara Elikim. So we know the word Bereshis is made up of the word bara shis. That's what it's explained in Kabbalah. Which means that Hashem created shis with 6. In Aramaic the word shis is 6. So Hashem used the 6 midas to create the world. But deeper yet, Barashis, Hashem created the 6 midas in order to be able to create the world. So whereas by us, midas is not a foreign entity within us, by Hashem, midas is a foreign entity. So therefore, for Hashem, midas are already part of Vavke. Midas already is Hashem stepping outside of himself. That's why by Hashem, the Yud is Chachma, the Hey is Bina, and the midas are already part of the Vav. The midas are already part of the Alman Diskalion, when Hashem is revealing himself to others. Whereas by us, no. Our midas are still part of who we are. So therefore, the Yud and the Hey are Chachma, Bina, and the midas. When do I begin to extend myself outside towards another is in the Vavke. So therefore, yes, we are reflections of Hashem. In which way are we reflections of Hashem? And that just like Hashem has 4 steps to the process, step number 1 is the original exposure of light. Step number 2 is the internal processing of that light. Step number 3 is relating to others within oneself. Step number 4 is the actual relating to others. Those four steps exist by Hashem and they exist by us also. However, they have different names to the steps because of the different nature, because of Hashem, his essential oneness, which we don't have. But what if someone wants to argue and say, one second, why can't we say that Rabbi Hashem also, his midas are so lofty that they're only about him? It's his midas and nothing else exists. He has midas, somehow or other, the midas don't relate to another. Their midas totally within him and about himself. What if someone wants to make that argument? So how does the Alter Rebbe preclude that? How does the Alter Rebbe bavar in that? By saying midas chastoi v'tuvoi. What is Yisoid? So later on in Iggeres HaKodesh in Siman Tezvav, the Alter Rebbe explains what is Yisoid. He says, if you want, you can look on page 244, 5 lines from the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom. Alter Rebbe, it's a fascinating letter. In the Iggeres HaKodesh, the Alter Rebbe goes through all the midas and all the spheres and explains them. The Alter Rebbe says, "U'bechinas Yisoid hi al derech mashal ha'iskashrus." Yisoid is iskashrus. Yisoid is connection. Yisoid is connection, which is also, by the way, if you know the physical map of the body, so So the right hand is chesed, the left hand is gvura, and yisoid are the reproductive organs, which are the organs of connection. Yisoid is the idea of connecting of the mashpia to the mekabel. So it's al derech mashal ha'iskashrus shemiskasher of sichlei b'seichel b'nai, that the father who's learning with his child connects his mind to to the mind of his child, b'shas limudei, while studying with him, b'shas limudei imay, bi'ava v'ratzon, with love and with desire, shereitza sheyavin b'nai, because he wants his child to understand. So yisoid is about connection, a deep connection. Midas chastei v'tuvei means, remember we said in the singular, midas chastei v'tuvei means that the whole six midas, which begins with chesed and concludes with yisoid, is one process. It's one midah. It's one process that begins with a feeling of kindness, but it ends. It goes through all the six spheres into the six midas, and it ends with yisoid, which is iskashrus, which is connection. So you can't come and argue. You can't say, well, maybe Hashem's midas and Hashem's midas, it's Him as He is for itself. No, take a look. The midas which begin with chesed, where do they end? They end with yisoid, with iskashrus to another. If it's iskashrus to another, then it must be that there is another. If there's another, that means it's Hashem stepping out of Himself. If it's Hashem stepping out of Himself, then it's Vavke, it's not Yudke. So with these words, midas chastei v'tuvei, in shorthand, what Rabbi Yitzchak was trying to allude is give a general explanation of the Perek, why there's a difference between the way it is, the Yudke Vavke, the way it is by Hashem, and the way it is by Klal Yisrael. But the bottom line is that we are reflections of Hashem. Our neshamas are reflections of Hashem. That's what we've covered in Perek Dalet, in Mitzvah Hashem. In next class in Perek Hey, we're going to try to figure out and what happens, chas v'shalom, when a yid does an avera. Stay tuned. Good Shabbos, everyone. Sei gesund, and see you next week.